Nobody saw him. That was the whole point. It was a Thursday night in Manhattan, the kind of night where the city hums with money and ambition and people who believe the world was built specifically for them. The event was held on the 42nd floor of a glass tower in Midtown, a private business networking dinner, invitation only, $500 a plate. The guests were investors, entrepreneurs, business school graduates, the kind of people whose names showed up in Forbes articles and whose phone contacts read like a who's who of American wealth. Caleb Washington was not one of them. He was 22 years old, wearing a white shirt and black slacks, moving quietly through the crowd with a tray of champagne glasses balanced in his hands. He was the waiter. And in that room, on that night, that meant he was invisible. He had grown up in Queens, not the cleaned-up, gentrified part the magazines like to photograph, but the real part, the part where the bodegas close late and the radiators knock all winter, and your mother works 2 jobs and still comes home tired with a smile on her face because she loves you too much to let you see her break. Caleb's mother, Linda, had raised him alone after his father left when Caleb was 7. She worked mornings at a laundry and evenings at a grocery store, and she never once complained in front of her son. What she gave him instead of money was something rarer. She gave him attention. She made him watch the world carefully. She told him, "Baby, listen more than you talk. The room will always tell you what it knows if you stay quiet long enough." Caleb never forgot that. He had no college degree. He had applied twice and been turned down for financial aid both times. He had a GED, a library card he used more than most people use their phones, and a hunger inside his chest that had no bottom to it. He had been working since he was 15, dishwasher, delivery boy, warehouse loader, now server at high-end events. But Caleb did not take the waiter job because he needed the $40 an hour. He took it because it was the only legal way a young man from Queens, with no connections and no credentials, could walk into a room full of the most powerful entrepreneurs on the East Coast. He had a plan. Tucked inside his shirt pocket was a small voice recorder, completely legal, completely his. Every time he refilled a glass, every time he passed a cluster of suits deep in conversation, he listened. He caught fragments of deals being structured, strategies being floated, industries being discussed, mistakes being confessed. The wealthy had a habit of speaking freely in front of service staff because they had decided, somewhere deep in their comfortable assumptions, that the people serving them were not really listening, that the people serving them were not really thinking, that the people serving them were simply background. That assumption was Caleb's greatest advantage. He moved through the room like water, smooth, quiet, present. A man near the bar, heavy-set, red-faced, loud in the way that money sometimes makes people loud, was holding court with a small circle of nodding admirers. He was talking about opportunity, about who deserved success and who did not, about the difference between people who built things and people who simply existed near things being built. Caleb came to refill his glass. The man glanced at him the way you glance at a piece of furniture, then turned back to his circle and said it like a verdict, like a fact of nature, like something carved into stone. "Guys like him will always be pouring drinks for guys like us." The circle laughed, not loudly, just enough. Caleb did not flinch. He did not clench his jaw. He did not let the heat behind his eyes become anything visible. He simply finished pouring, nodded once, and moved on to the next table. But something happened in his chest in that moment. Not anger, not shame, not the urge to prove anything to anyone in that room on that night. It was quieter than all of that. It was a decision. a door closing on one version of his life and another one opening, slow and sure, in the dark. He went home that night to his small apartment on Sutphin Boulevard, a studio with a window that faced a brick wall and a radiator that sounded like it was arguing with itself. He sat on the edge of his bed and replayed the recording. He had 37 minutes of conversation from that single event. He pulled out his notepad and began to write, not notes, patterns. The way people described problems that needed solving, the way they talked about logistics, shipping, supply chains, last-mile delivery, always in the same frustrated tone. He heard it again and again across different conversations that night. The same gap, the same pain point, the same unsolved problem. He circled it in red. Then he did what he would do for the next 3 years. He studied. Not in a classroom, but the way a man studies when no one is giving him a grade and everything is on the line. He read every book on supply chain and logistics he could find. He found free courses online, and he took them at midnight after his shifts ended. He walked into FedEx and UPS offices and asked questions until they asked him to leave. He called small business owners in Brooklyn and the Bronx and asked them what frustrated them most about shipping. He found a mentor, a retired operations manager named Gerald, a black man in his 60s from Detroit who had spent 30 years building and breaking systems for a living, who saw something in Caleb that Caleb was still learning to see in himself. Gerald told him once, sitting on a park bench in Flushing Meadows, "The people who change industries are almost never the ones who studied the industry. They're the ones who watched it from the outside and got angry at how broken it was." There were failures, real ones. Caleb launched his first small delivery coordination service at 25, and it collapsed inside of 8 months. He lost $4,000 he had saved over 2 years. He was 26, broke, and sitting on a failure, with Gerald's voice in his ear and his mother's tired face in his memory and that red circle in his notepad staring back at him like a question. He rebuilt. Slower this time, smarter. He partnered with 2 other people, a woman named Priya who understood technology in ways Caleb was still learning, and a man named Darius from Atlanta who could sell water to the ocean. Together, the 3 of them built something leaner, tighter, and built for the specific pain point Caleb had first heard in a room where no one thought he was listening. The company was called Bridgeway Logistics. By the time Caleb was 31, Bridgeway was operating in 7 states. By 32, they had 3 major contracts with regional retail chains. By the time he was 33, they were being called one of the fastest-growing logistics startups on the entire East Coast. Caleb had moved out of the Sutphin Boulevard apartment. His mother had stopped working 2 jobs. Gerald had a standing lunch invitation every other Tuesday that Caleb never canceled, not once, through any amount of busyness or success. He had become the investor now. He sat across conference tables from people who needed his capital and his belief and his signature on a check. He wore the same calm on his face that he had learned to wear on a crowded event floor in Midtown. Still, watchful, present. And then, on a Tuesday morning in March, the boardroom door opened. The man who walked in was heavier than Caleb remembered, a little grayer, still loud in the way he carried himself, though the volume had been turned down some by a decade's worth of market changes and a few business setbacks of his own. He had a pitch deck under his arm and the particular kind of nervous energy that people carry when they need something. His company was in the transportation space, not moving, interestingly, in the exact opposite direction from the growth curves his early confidence had predicted. He sat down across from Caleb. He looked at the nameplate, he looked at the face, and Caleb watched the exact moment it connected.
watched the color shift somewhere behind the man's eyes, watched the mouth open slightly and then close again, watched 10 years collapse into a single second of recognition. The room went very quiet. Caleb let the silence breathe. Then he reached for the glass of water on his side of the table and slid it slowly, gently across to the man sitting across from him. "Let's talk business," he said. And they did. Caleb listened to the pitch with full attention, asked real questions, took real notes. When it was over, he funded the deal, not out of mercy, not out of performance, but because it was a solid opportunity, and Caleb Washington had never once confused good business with personal score settling. That was not who he was. That was not what he was building. But some months later, Caleb sat down for an interview with a business podcast out of Atlanta, the kind of long, quiet conversation where people tell the truth. And when the host asked him about his greatest source of motivation, Caleb did not talk about money or strategy or market timing. He told the waiter story, all of it. The 42nd floor, the champagne tray, the voice recorder in his pocket, the red circle in his notepad, the words that were meant to put a ceiling on his life. The clip went everywhere. Millions of people, young people in small apartments, people carrying trays and mops and uniforms, people who had been looked past and talked over and quietly dismissed, watched that video and felt something shift inside them. Not because Caleb was insulted and bounced back in some dramatic, cinematic revenge, but because he simply refused to let someone else's small vision of him become the truth. He stayed quiet. He stayed focused. He stayed dangerous. Here is the lesson, and it is a simple one. The room that humiliates you today may be the room that needs you tomorrow. You do not need to respond to people who underestimate you. You do not need to argue or prove or perform. You just need to keep listening, keep learning, and keep building, quietly, steadily, and with everything you've got. Because the most powerful thing you can do for a person who does not believe in you is simply to outlast them. Pour the drink, take the notes, go home and build. Your moment is coming, and when it does, you will not have to say a word. The room will say it for you.